Hello, everyone. My name is Matt, and this is Alex,
Hi.
and it's great to be with you this evening. I hope you're finding these daily reflections helpful and enjoyable, as of course at the moment we have to get by without being able to meet up with other people. The question I'd like to ask you today to think about before we get to our Bible reading is, who are your neighbours? I wonder how much you're seeing of your neighbours at the moment. I wonder if you're seeing more of them than usual or less, as people at the moment are cooped up at home.
Also, who are the people that you see normally on a daily basis? Perhaps they are the people that you sit next to at school. I wonder if you get on with them. What kind of relationship have you got with them?
So that's the question. Who are your neighbours? Now, I'd like you to listen out for that question in our Bible reading today, because someone actually asks Jesus that very question. Who is my neighbour?
The parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise."
Well, Jesus is famous, isn't he, for telling stories? And of course, this is one of his most famous. It's known as the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, a lot of people read this parable as an example of how you should love people. For example, that we should be less like the priest and the religious leader, but more like the Samaritan. We shouldn't walk by on the other side when people need help, but actually stop and help people. And there's definitely something true in that. I think the Samaritan definitely is a good example. He's someone we should try and copy in that sense. Now, of course, at the moment, so many people aren't even being allowed out, perhaps to go shopping or collect their medicine. We do need, as a society, to take the time to stop and help people who need it. That's definitely one good lesson from this parable.
But don't we all know that it is good to stop and help people? Is that really all that Jesus was saying? If that's true, that's a pretty boring point to make.
But I think what Jesus was saying is more important than that. I wonder if you noticed who Jesus was speaking to. He was speaking to a religious teacher, a person who made his living teaching others the Bible and what it meant. And the passage tells us why he was asking Jesus the question. He wasn't asking him because he really wanted to learn from Jesus. He was actually trying to catch Jesus out. He was trying to use Jesus' words against him and trying to get him into trouble. The man says to Jesus, "Okay, you say I need to love my neighbour. So who is my neighbour?" The reason he's asking him this question is he wants Jesus to tell him who his neighbour is and who his neighbour isn't. So it's going to be easier for him to actually do what the law says. And really he wants Jesus to tell him that his neighbour is just going to be somebody like him, somebody who is going to find it easier to love. Instead of answering directly this question, who's my neighbour, Jesus instead tells this story. He talks about this traveller who's robbed and left in desperate need. But the two people who are just like him, they come past, but they don't stop to help. In the end, it's this Samaritan who comes past. Now, we have to understand that Samaritans and Jews absolutely hated each other. The man who had been robbed wouldn't ever have expected this man to stop and help him, but he does. And he doesn't only help, he doesn't just do the minimum. He actually puts himself in danger. He spends his own money to help the man. He takes time to bring him to safety at an inn. And at the end of the story, Jesus asks the person he's speaking to, who was a neighbour to the man in trouble? The man who was talking to Jesus has to admit the neighbour is the one who actually stopped to help. And when we see it like this, we need to realise we as human beings, we're not naturally very much like the Good Samaritan. We don't naturally love people that we don't like. In fact, we don't tend to have much to do with people who aren't very much like us.
The Good Samaritan isn't meant to be us. The Good Samaritan is actually Jesus. When we are helpless, like the man who had been robbed, Jesus will come to help us.
I think at the moment it's becoming very clear how helpless and powerless we actually are as human beings. Not only do we not love people like we should do, but we're also realising that we can't do much about some of the problems that we have in our world today. I think this situation with the coronavirus reminds us that we can't control that much in our lives, actually. We rely on God for so many aspects in our lives without even realising it. But the good news for us is that Jesus is still the Good Samaritan. When we can't help ourselves, he will come to help us. But if we ask him, he will come to help us, and that's comforting. He will help us to love our neighbours better, but he will also help us as we try to live for him in these really confusing times.
It was really good to have you with us, and we hope that you found it helpful to read this story with us and hear a few thoughts. And let us know if you've got any thoughts or any comments. But it was lovely to have you with us. Thank you very much. Bye.
We'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.